Retreating further and further to the west, the enemy continued to undermine bridges, viaducts, even blew up the highway. Often we had to go off-road. I remember once we spent a whole day moving along the bank of a mountain river, several times crossing the shallow water to one or the other bank. It got dark when we crossed the river for the last time and found ourselves on a small plain. A few houses could be seen ahead. We decided to make a break. The head outpost stopped at the outermost building. One of the commanders knocked on the door. It opened a little bit, and we were asked in an incomprehensible language. Our Moldovan border guard translated for me. "Comrade Captain, there are gypsies here." We turned on an electric light and entered the house. The yellow-black smoked walls were covered with water droplets from the smoky furnace. On the floor, covered with a thick layer of crumpled straw, old men, women, children, boys and men were lying tightly pressed against each other. With great difficulty we found a place to stand. They asked what the name of the village was. A broad-shouldered, thick-bearded gypsy who had risen from the floor answered, "This is not a village." "No. What is it?" "Bah. A winter gypsy tabor. There are only 10 such kibbutz here." His message puzzled me, to continue the march in pitch darkness over the road, not knowing the terrain, when the mountain rivers swelled from the spring water. And even if we get to a good road, there is still danger it could have been mined. Apparently the gypsy guessed what I was thinking. He said something loudly, and everything on the floor moved like a big anthill. The bearded gypsy giant noisily opened the door, and everyone went somewhere. In a few minutes the gypsy came back, led us to the second kibitka, then to the third, and showed us with his hand take a seat. "What about you?" We squeezed in and settled in the rest of the parking lots. "Well, thank you." "Thank you." We took the huts, and the cart was placed around them. Our chambers were not very cozy, but it was not cold water squelching under our feet. The soldiers and commanders had a little rest. At dawn we left the gypsy tabor that had sheltered us. Despite the early hour, the gypsies were all outside. They were talking merrily about something, laughing and singing. When we passed the last kibitka, they waved to us for a long time. Parting with this cheerful, colourfully dressed crowd, with barefooted kids, I involuntarily remembered Pushkin's lines, "Gypsies roam noisily through Bessarabia." It turns out that they roam here, too, in Czechoslovakia. When the ground dries up, they will leave their winter refuge. We weren't so lucky. The river flowing here overflowed so much that the water rose above the bridge by 30 centimetres. We had to walk through the raging torrent. We almost overcame it safely, but one of our trophy cars got stuck. We decided not to swim in the cold water because of it, to abandon it. And then, as if from under the ground, the same gypsies came to our aid on horseback. They brought logs and ropes and helped to pull the car out of the water. Apparently these eternally nomadic people cared about the fate of their homeland, and they helped us to speed up the day and hour of expulsion of fascist conquerors from Czechoslovakia. On May 2nd, 1945, the capital of the Nazi Reich, Berlin, fell. Shortly before that, the command of the rear guard troops of the First Belarusian Front addressed the soldiers and commanders of the frontier troops. The appeal said, "The great hour has come. The victorious troops of the First Belarusian Front went to storm Berlin. The enemy is being dealt the last fatal blow. We are experiencing historic days. Did not each of us dream about them in the steppes of Stalingrad, on the Kursk fields, and in the forests of Belarus? Did we not bring them closer by honest soldiers' labour, sleepless Chekist service? And now these days have come. Now we will finally settle accounts with the enemy. We will repay him 100-fold for the blood and tears of the Soviet people, for the ruins and ashes of our towns and villages. The enemy is trying by any means to delay the hour of his death. He sends his spies to us even more than before. He shoots from around corners, with disguises and cunning. But nothing will help the Germans now. They will be defeated to the end." Fighting friends. The success of the advancing Red Army units depends on our labour. No matter how disguised enemy spies are, we must find them. No matter how cunning and crafty the saboteurs are, we must catch them. No fascist should escape the harsh retribution. Let our eyes be sharp, let our hand never know fatigue, let our hearts boil with ineradicable hatred for the enemy. Victory is gained in hard work and in harsh battles. By organization, discipline and order in the service, in the campaign, in everyday life decide the success of the case. Our regiments worked gloriously in the days of the winter offensive of the Red Army. Now, on the eve of victory, all our forces to defeat the enemy. Comrades, to the share of our front fell a great honor to hoist the banner of victory over Berlin. The eyes of the motherland are turned to us now. The whole freedom-loving world is looking at us. Let's be worthy of the high honor. Forward to Berlin. Death to the German invaders. Together with the Red Army units, the border guards stormed Berlin, took the Reichstag and the Imperial Chancellery, distinguished themselves in many street battles and in the performance of special tasks. Berlin was taken. The Berlin garrison and the Berlin grouping of Hitler's troops ceased to exist. We learned about this victory of our armies on the approaches to the Czechoslovakian city of Olomouc. The battalion was marching. In the evening, in a small village, we made a halt. Sergeant Rumyantsev, a cipher operator, ran up to me and gave me a telegram. On his face was such a smile that I involuntarily asked, "What are you so happy about, Comrade Sergeant?" "How not to rejoice, Comrade Combat? Ours have taken Berlin. Now the fascists are dead." "How do you know they've taken Berlin?" "And you, Comrade Captain, read the telegram?" I quickly ran the lines of the telegram, in which the regiment command reported that the troops of the 1st Ukrainian and 1st Belarusian fronts defeated the Berlin grouping of the enemy and captured the capital of Germany, Berlin. I ordered the battalion to line up and read out the telegram. A mighty hurrah rang through the mountain valley. People embraced each other. How many joyful thoughts this short message gave birth to each of us. Here it is, the near hour of our final victory over fascism. How much we have waited for this hour, how much we have endured for it to come, how much our people have suffered in the long bloody war, to finally hear about its near end. Here is the completion of our retribution for the thousands of destroyed towns and villages, for the tears and grief of our mothers, wives, children. We rejoiced. There were only a few days left before the unconditional surrender of Hitler's Germany. One May Day we settled down in the village Budislav near Litomyshl. We had just stopped when 2 Czechs came running and reported that a convoy of Germans was moving nearby. The battalion went up on alarm. We climbed up the mountain and then descended to a completely flat place near the railroad station. There was a road here. On it a dozen transport vehicles appeared. We deployed the battalion, fired a few volleys from anti-tank rifles into the air, and also opened machine gun fire. The column stopped. We stopped firing, sent to the Germans a parliamentarian, one of our voluntary helpers. It was announced to the German officer that they were surrounded. The Soviet officer offered to lay down arms, people to build near the vehicles, weapons to leave in the bodies. These conditions were accepted. So we disarmed a motorized rifle battalion of the 1st Tank Army. True, they were ersatz soldiers, drafted, apparently, on the last total mobilization. But the equipment was new. Machines of the brands Horch and Opel-Blitz passed only 500 kilometers. It became known about the uprising in Prague. Our tank armies rushed there to help the rebellious Praguers. They came not only from the east, but also from the north, from Germany, from Dresden, rushing to the rescue. They overcame everything on their way. By the end of May 8th, our tankers were only a few hours away from Prague, and just east of the Czechoslovak capital, in the area of Pardubis, Hradec Králové, Mladá Boleslav, the main forces of Army Group Center. The last hope of the new German government, which was headed after Hitler's suicide by Grand Admiral Dönitz, were caught in the ring. In the second half of May 8th, our battalion concentrated in the place Skutek, southeast of Pardubis. I set up my command post, a car with a radio station in the garden. I talked to the owner of the house. He turned out to be an employee of the local post office. He had a wife and a daughter. From the first minutes we established the warmest relations. The owner offered us to occupy the second floor of his mansion. But the day was warm, apple trees were blooming in the garden, and we didn't want to leave. In the evening, together with the Czech family, we had dinner right outside, under one of the spreading apple trees. Our new acquaintances told us how the Czechoslovak people had resisted the invaders, how glad they were that the Red Army had liberated them. Then they began to question us. My daughter was especially talkative and asked how students lived and studied in the Soviet Union. "How much money do you have to pay to study at the university?" she asked. "And can children of workers and peasants be admitted to the institute?" It was not difficult for us to answer these and other questions, and at the same time to see how little the girl knew about our country. The first lesson of political literacy took place. It was not the last. Wherever we could, we told the Czechoslovak citizens about the Soviet Union, about our homeland. We did not know yet that in the Berlin suburb of Karlshorst, in the building of the military engineering school, border guards had already taken up posts, guarding the place where the historic event was to take place, the signing of the Act of Unconditional Surrender of Nazi Germany. With Captain Anisimov, we went around the night location of units, checked the sentry guards. Border guards were serving clearly. By 2:00 we returned to the CP. Lieutenant Burinov, commander of the communications platoon, greeted us with news. "Comrade Captain, the war is over." "Who told you about it?" "I heard it myself. The Americans just radioed that the Nazi troops surrendered in Berlin." "Is it sure?" I doubted. "I think it is, Comrade Captain." On the radio, the German command transmitted an order to cease fire. At that time, a powerful artillery cannonade was heard to the west of Pardubis. "Something is wrong here, I noticed. Tell you what, Lieutenant Burinov, don't tell anyone about it yet." But it turned out to be true. In the morning, shooting started everywhere. Soon this arbitrary salute in honor of our victory died down. Lieutenant Burinov handed me a telegram from the regiment commander. On May 8, 1945, representatives of defeated Hitler's Germany in Berlin signed the Act of Unconditional Surrender. We congratulate the personnel on the victory. As on the occasion of the capture of Berlin, I ordered to build the battalion and announced the text of the received telegram. Our joy was unbounded. Soon this greatest act was announced by Czechoslovak radio. The news also came that on May 9th Soviet troops liberated Prague. The people of the city came to us with flowers. We congratulated each other on the victory. Then there was a mass meeting. People were rejoicing. Music played late into the night. People sang, hugged and kissed each other, came to us, Soviet fighters, to express their gratitude. To mark the complete victory over Germany, a salute from 1,000 guns was made in Moscow. Stalin addressed the Soviet people. "Comrades, compatriots and compatriots," he said, "the great day of victory over Germany has come. 3 years ago Hitler declared to the people that his task included dismembering the Soviet Union and tearing away from it the Caucasus, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltics and other areas. He bluntly declared, 'We will destroy Russia so that it can never rise again.' But Hitler's crazy ideas were not destined to come true. The course of the war dispelled them in the dust. The Great Patriotic War ended with our complete victory. The period of war in Europe is over. The period of peaceful development has begun. Yes, the war is over. The troops of the 1st, 2nd and 4th Ukrainian fronts, having encircled the enemy grouping of Army's centre, forced the Nazi troops to surrender. About 900,000 soldiers and officers of the enemy were captured. However, even after the end of hostilities in the forests, in the mountains remained many small groups of defeated German units and formations. All sorts of proxies and accomplices of the fascists were hiding there. They were sure that they would be able to hide in the forests and then move to the western parts of Germany. In those days one could often hear in towns and villages of Czechoslovakia such announcements on the radio: Uwaga, Uwaga, 3 or 5 SS men appeared in the village of so-and-so and went into the forest. Then there was an appeal to the citizens and the gendarmerie to organize their search and to inform the commanders of the Soviet troops. By the decision of the Military Council of the Front, we were obliged to clear the forests of Czechoslovakia of unkilled Hitlerites. So day after day after day after May 9th, the regiment units, continued small battles, eliminating various groups of the enemy who did not want to surrender. I remember at the end of May we received data that in the forest near the mountain ridge in tourist houses Germans were hiding. There are always a lot of surprises in the mountains. Therefore, I decided to leave in the village together with the rear of the battalion fighters and commanders of old age and those who had previously had severe wounds. The more enduring ones were divided into 3 groups. I mapped out a route for each group so that it would be easier to encircle the area. Although all of us had passed a good school of action in mountainous forests, and during the war we had overcome more than one mountain range in the Carpathians, in the Low and High Tatras, but this ascent seemed to me the most difficult. People were breathing heavily, the noise and ringing was in their ears, their hearts were squeezing. Everyone was thinking, will the end of this ascent be soon? At last the forest thinned out. We came out on the plateau. Ahead we saw a clearing. Among spruce and fir trees we could see small panel houses scattered here and there. They were empty. However, there were still traces of people's stay. Even the grass in the clearing had not had time to rise yet. Having had a rest, we continued our search. By the evening we found huts in the forest near the clearing. Lieutenant Dudarenko went around them from one side, Senior Lieutenant Kolesnikov from the other. Captain Anisimov with a group of fighters went straight to the huts. Seeing the fighters, their occupants hurriedly left their hiding places, intending to hide in the forest. But everywhere they ran into our dense barriers. Having ascertained that they could not escape from the ring, they gathered in the clearing and surrendered. Among the motley clad crowd, 170 Hitler's soldiers, 10 of them officers. The sight of them is pitiful. They are dirty and ragged, their faces are covered with stubble. A little away from the Germans, a group of people dressed differently. One especially stood out with his attire. He wore boots, pants with wide red stripes, a cap, and a dark blue tunic. He turned out to be a representative of the so-called Union of the Don and Kuban Cossacks. We gathered all this rabble, built and took them to one of the reception points for prisoners of war. At the beginning of June, the troops of our front received an order to leave the territory of Czechoslovakia and go to the area of the Polish cities of Gliwice and Katowice. Right from the march, the troops were loaded into echelons and left for their destinations. Our regiment was the last to leave Czechoslovakia. Each battalion had representatives of the front headquarters, and it was their duty to compensate the local population for material damage, which could be caused by negligence or other reasons by the troops leaving the country. After all, the war had just ended. On the roads there were often many blown-up bridges and other obstacles that had to be bypassed. It happened that the tank hit the corner of a fence or crushed a tree. In another place, coming off a destroyed road, the troops followed a sown field. The representative of the front headquarters was paying for all this with the owners of fences, broken trees, crumpled crops. Only when our representative was convinced that all claims were satisfied, he left these places. One day we also found ourselves in Gliwice, the town where, in fact, the Second World War began. Preparing to attack Poland, the Nazis had prepared a provocation, which was called Operation Himmler. Despite all their adventurism, the Nazis sought to justify their actions both in the face of the German people and the world community. For this purpose, a provocative attack on the German radio station in Gliwice was organized. It was carried out by SS men and criminals disguised in the uniforms of Polish soldiers. All the participants in the attack were shot on Himmler's orders, but there was a pretext for the seizure of Poland. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi German troops invaded Poland. The Second World War began. We found ourselves in Gliwice 6 years later, when the war in Europe was over. The Soviet Union had made enormous sacrifices on the altar of victory. Only in the land of Czechoslovakia 140,000 Soviet soldiers remained forever. Almost 500,000 of our soldiers were wounded during the liberation of this country. Border Guards Lieutenant Ivanov, Sergeant Gorodniansky, Sergeant Anisimov, Sergeant Kovtun and other soldiers in green caps remained in Czechoslovakia forever. Once I was shown a letter of pioneers from the Slovakian village of Eljups. It was given to the soldiers of the Soviet group of troops in Czechoslovakia. Here is what the Slovak pioneers wrote, unfamiliar Soviet hero. The 4th Detachment of the Pioneer Organization of the Group of Yuri Maha at the main 9-year school in Slovak Loops congratulates you on the occasion of your holiday, the day of the Soviet Army and Navy. We are grateful to all Soviet soldiers, heroes of the war, because you fought fearlessly, without sparing your lives, so that we could study freely and live happily. You protected us so that we could build our beautiful homeland. May your hard memories of the war be comforted by the gratitude of Slovak pioneers and children. You know what you fought for, and so do we, and we will always remember the sacrifices you made for all of us. Thank you for everything. Your grateful pioneers of the Group of Yuri Maha of the basic 9-year school in Slovak Lupka. I don't remember if we had to be in Slovak Eljups or not, nor did I see the pioneers who wrote this letter, but I know the sincere love of the citizens of Czechoslovakia for the Soviet army, which liberated their homeland from Hitler's invaders, lives and will live forever in their hearts. As lives this love and gratitude in the peoples of all countries liberated by our army, among the representatives of which were the Soviet border guards. I keep a letter received by me and the men of the battalion in Czechoslovakia, by orders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Marshal of the Soviet Union, Comrade Stalin, No. 260 of January 27th, 1945, No. 355 of April 30th, 1945, No. 365 of May 8th, 1945, for the capture of the towns of Spiska Nowa Wes, Spiska Stara Wes, Levocha, Moravian Ostrava, and Olomouc on the territory of Poland and the Czechoslovak Republic, all the personnel, including you, who took part in the liberation of the named towns, are commended. After the end of the war in Europe, the troops of the 4th Ukrainian Front were leaving for the Far East. At the end of June, our regiment was loaded into echelons. However, this time we did not follow the front troops. We were transferred to Germany. Destroyed cities, burned villages, mangled enemy military equipment were passing by the doors of the trains. At first we did not know the exact destination, but then it became known that the regiment was being transferred to Berlin. The city met us with piles of broken bricks, mangled frames of the station, debris of walls, burned cars, broken tanks and guns, complete desertion of streets. So this is what you are, the capital of the Nazi Reich. The border guards looked curiously at the defeated city lying in ruins. Someone asked, "Did they catch Hitler, I wonder? If they haven't caught him yet, they will anyway." We did not know then that Hitler committed suicide and his corpse was covered with gasoline and burned. Our stay in Berlin was short. We were sent to Potsdam. Potsdam was luckier, only the neighborhoods adjacent to the station were destroyed. From here we arrived at the airfield. Border guards from different regiments, released from the rear guard of the fronts, had already gathered there. Military roads scattered the soldiers and commanders of the 94th Border Guard Unit, and here we met again. I found former heads of outposts, Captains Savely Syrenko, Vasily Fomichov, Mikhail Troshevsky, Vasily Gorbunov, Mikhail Gavrikov, platoon commanders Ivan Komarov, Nikolai Ivanishchev, and many others. Nobody knew why we had come to Potsdam, but somehow we were not very interested in it, ready to fulfill any task. We survived when Hitler's tank avalanches tore our fronts. Now we can cope with any other task somehow. By evening, a whole delegation of generals, officers and civilians arrived at the battalion location. We were far from a parade. In the battalion gathered people of different ages. Our uniforms were worn out, some had bandages after wounds. However, most of us were decorated with orders. The border guards saw off the commission with a brave look. I remember the senior representative, walking along the line, said, "Here's the thing, the commander, builders, of course, from your fighters will not turn out, but these days teach them to salute with and without weapons." Soon transport planes landed on the airfield. They delivered us new uniforms and weapons. We learned that we were charged with guarding the upcoming conference here, which would bring representatives of the anti-Hitler coalition powers. First of all, we had to prepare the premises. From morning till late evening, the soldiers wiped windows and doors in the palace of the German Crown Prince, took out garbage from the building, arranged furniture, cleaned up the territory of Sanssouci Park. The Chief of Staff of the Frontier Troops, which was entrusted with the protection of the conference, Colonel Arthur Volkov, together with the command of the units, were developing a system of protection of Potsdam. On July 14th, our regiment was transferred to the Potsdam railway station. All day and all night, until morning, we guarded the approaches to the station. On July 15th in the morning, a column of passenger cars arrived here. People in civilian clothes and military men were checking the condition of the access roads, how we were doing our duty. But then the cars left. The station became quiet. One more night we guarded the railroad tracks, platforms, approaches to them. The morning of July 16th came. The station square was filled with a string of cars. Those who arrived went to the platform. Soon it was transmitted, "Stop movement. Stay where you are." Everyone froze in anticipation. Smoothly rolled up the train. On the steps of the car appeared I, Stalin. Marshal of the Soviet Union Zhukov approached him. Stalin said hello to Zhukov and leisurely went to the place where stood welcoming him. By raising his hand, Stalin greeted everyone. The conference began to work in the afternoon. With a sense of great responsibility and pride, we guarded the participants of the Potsdam Conference, which delivered the final verdict on fascism. Our service went without incident, although the tension and load on the fighters and commanders were very great. On August 2nd, the conference closed. It made important decisions and agreements. The report on the results of the conference said, "The Allies do not intend to destroy or throw the German people into slavery. The Allies intend to give the German people the opportunity to prepare themselves for the future reconstruction of their lives on a democratic and peaceful basis. If the German people's own efforts are unceasingly directed toward this goal, it will be possible for them in the course of time to take their place among the free and peaceful peoples of the world. Yes, we did not come to Germany as conquerors. We helped the workers in every possible way to build a new life, helped to strengthen the democratic forces. Soviet soldiers, including border guards, helped the German people to rebuild destroyed towns and villages, to raise factories and mines from ruins. Cultural institutions were also put in order. Theatres and cinemas began to work, concert halls and museums were opened. Medical service of the population was organized. Everything was done so that the German people began to live a normal life, so that fascism would never revive again. Even when there were battles on the territory of Germany, the military councils of the fronts wrote in their appeals to the troops, "A real soldier of the Red Army will never resemble fascist cannibals, will never drop the dignity of a Soviet citizen. He cannot forget the main thing. The sacred and noble goal of the war, for the sake of which our people took up arms to defeat the German fascist army and punish fascist criminals. We are not taking revenge on the German people, but want to help them throw off this bloodthirsty monster fascism." The correct behavior of our soldiers, their impeccable attitude to German citizens, made it impossible for the fascist scoundrels to incite hatred towards the Red Army, our soldiers and officers. On the contrary, they won more and more sympathy from the population. Picking through old newspapers, I found in one of them a confession of a soldier of the National People's Army of the GDR, Malte Siebert. Recalling the years of war, he wrote how fearfully his family waited for the arrival of the Red Army. And then the Soviet soldiers appeared. Siebert's little brother accidentally exploded on a German mine. And when the boy needed blood, it was given by the Soviet soldier Sergei. Are these really the same Russians about whom the radio was telling terrible things? The answer to that question came by itself. Several Soviet soldiers had taken up residence in our house. They immediately asked us to let them cook their dinner in our kitchen. But where was it ever seen that Victor asked permission from the vanquished, and only later, when they invited us to the table, did the last fears dissipate. This episode reminded me of our stay in the small German town of Querfurt, where the battalion headquarters was stationed. We occupied some administrative building on the very outskirts of the city. It was adjoined by several two-story mansions. We asked the owners for permission to live with them. They took the second floors for our officers. Each of us paid for the occupied rooms, as well as for light, gas, water, amortization of furniture at local rates. The attitude toward the officers of the battalion everywhere was generally friendly. I, too, made friends with the German family I was staying with, and we parted, when the time came, very warmly. But the struggle with those who in every possible way hindered the normalization of the situation in Germany continued, and one of the organizations we had to deal with was the werewolf gangs. What were the werewolf gangs that operated in Germany at the end of the war and after it? Almost simultaneously with the Volkssturm was born and Werwolf. According to Hitler's leadership, this underground organization was to do what could not be accomplished with the help of tank divisions. The werewolf gangs were being prepared to continue the struggle after the war. They were to be the base of the resistance movement in Germany. The plan of organization of such resistance provided for the creation of underground weapons and radio communications depots, combat and terrorist groups, training of sabotage and espionage personnel. Werewolf was primarily against the Red Army and the organs of socialist power. The slogan of this organization was "Kill them, kill them, kill them all." The werewolf included many of the most brutal Nazis, among them before the transition to the West, and the commander of Army Group Center, Field Marshal General Schorner, who enjoyed Hitler's special trust for inhuman cruelty. The border guards had begun the fight against the werewolf gangs while the war was still going on. Now that fight was continuing. The land around Querfurt had once belonged to Count Werner von Schulenburg, the German ambassador to Moscow on the eve of the war. Near Querfurt was the Schulenburg family castle. One day we were informed that the Count had appeared at the castle. It was necessary to see him, as he was wanted among the war criminals. With Captain Vasilchenko, we rushed to the castle. By that time, there was already an agricultural school here, training specialists for cooperative farms. We were told, yes, the Count was there, looking for his nanny, but since she was not found in the castle, he went to the place where her parents used to live. Wasting no time, we drove to the village in question. We found the right house. The door was opened by a short woman in her 60s. In addition to her, there was a young woman and a man no older than 30. Although it was already past midnight, it seemed that they were not going to sleep. The young age of the man discouraged us somewhat. The former ambassador Schulenburg could not have grown so young. Nevertheless, I asked, "Are you Count Schulenburg?" "Oh, no," said the man. "I am not a count. It's my father who is a count. The first am the pianist Schulenburg, and this is my wife, a singer. We have come to our homeland and will be giving concerts. But I really wanted to see my nanny." We learned that when the Nazis began to exterminate the Jews in Germany, young Schulenburg emigrated with his favorite Jewish girl and saved her. And now he returned to his homeland, where neither he nor she was threatened. From the son of the former ambassador, we learned about the involvement of Werner Schulenburg, as well as his brother Fritz Schulenburg, in the conspiracy of July 20th, 1944. Werner Schulenburg joined the conspirators immediately after the defeat of Hitler's troops at Stalingrad, and was to take the post of foreign minister in the new government. Where his father was now, young Schulenburg did not know. We parted warmly with the Schulenburgs and wished them success in their concert activities. However, acquaintance with the family castle of the Schulenburgs was not useless. A trip there brought us on the trail of one of the werewolf organizations. Not far from the castle, there was an empty building of the former school of Hitler's civilian pilots. Sometimes teenagers of 15 to 17 years of age gathered there, and a woman posing as a teacher often visited them. It was established that in the past this Frau led the organization of the Hitler Youth. There was also a man with her. A group of young men have a clandestine weapons cache. We seized these weapons and ammunition, which barely fit in 2 cars. We also detained a man who turned out to be a former Hitler colonel and later an agent of the so-called Gehlen organization. We also arrested the Frau, and she was accused of subversion. The burgomaster of the district invited the parents of the teenagers and told them what their children were doing. Democratic organizations asked the Soviet command to hand over the underage children into their hands. One day our typewriter at headquarters was out of order. We began to find out through local anti-fascists where we could repair it or buy a new one. Soon we were informed that, at the beginning of 1945, several cars with boxes of stationery and typewriters were brought to the Champagne factory in Freiburg. One day we decided to visit the factory. At the gatehouse we were met by a tall, gaunt German who called himself Ivan Ivanovich. Soon the director appeared. We explained what we needed, to which he was very surprised. We have 3 machines in the plant office, but no more. The director regretted that he could not help us in any way and invited us to look around the plant, asking Ivan Ivanovich to be our guide. All this time Ivan Ivanovich spoke to us in impeccable Russian. We asked where he had studied it. I am an anti-fascist. I read Russian literature. All through the war one was in Nazi camps together with Soviet comrades. I taught them German, they taught me Russian. The Red Army liberated us, and I returned to my native land. After visiting the factory, we said goodbye to Ivan Ivanovich and left for Querfurt. Don't you think, Elia Dmitrievich, that Ivan Ivanovich is not who he says he is? I asked Vasilchenko, with whom we had travelled to the factory together. Yes, it seemed that way to me too. Too much he is trained, and the look of a professional scout. Well, that he was trained, it is understandable. So much time spent in the Nazi walls, involuntarily learn it. But his look is really not very kind, wary, as if he is not an anti-fascist but a fascist. Try to find out what kind of bird it is. Vasilchenko established that Ivan Ivanovich had never before lived in these parts, which he called his native land, and is not a native of these places. He was born in one of the northern regions of the country. True. As they said, he was convicted as an anti-fascist and 5 months before the defeat of Hitler's troops was transferred from prison to camp. Together with other prisoners of fascist concentration camps, he was liberated by the Red Army. Vasilchenko visited the place where Ivan Ivanovich lived in the pre-war years, and learned that the one who called himself by his simple Russian name Ivan, until 1941 worked in the Soviet Union as an employee of the German embassy. Soon it was possible to establish the reason for Ivan Ivanovich's stay in Freiburg. In the chalk tunnels under the champagne factory we found a workshop for the manufacture of light small arms, a warehouse of food and other property. All this had been brought to the champagne factory under the guise of typewriters and stationery and was intended for underground fascist organizations. That was the end of the story about finding a typewriter. We got it elsewhere. At that time we had to deal not only with the werewolf, but also with individual agents connected with the West German intelligence service, which was headed by Reinhard Gehlen, who during the war had been head of the Foreign Armies of the East Department in the General Command of the Land Forces. Now had to catch spies Gehlen, which he sent to new addresses. The future head of the intelligence service of the FRG accumulated considerable experience while serving as head of the Department Foreign Armies of the East. Therefore he was considered a major specialist in total espionage, but all that he had worked so hard to establish was swept away by the Red Army, liquidated by the border guards. One of the archival files keeps a report on the results of service and operational activities of the 2nd Battalion of the 92nd Frontier Regiment for 1944. Here are the lines of the report in the Great Patriotic War of the Soviet people against the German invaders, the 2nd Battalion, performing tasks to protect the rear of the Red Army, for 11.5 months of the current year, overcame the way from the Dnieper coast to Czechoslovakia, making a transition of more than 2,000 kilometers, were past Kiev, Vinica, Zhytomyr, Kamianets-Podolsk, Kernopil, Chernivtsi, Stanislavl and Drogoboich regions. The Carpathian Mountains along the Veretsky Pass were overcome, as Transcarpathian Rus and part of the territory of Czechoslovakia were passed. Continuously conducting troop reconnaissance, constantly studying the conditions of the terrain and the ever-changing situation, the personnel of the battalion privates, sergeants and officers skillfully organized their service and combat activities, honestly and selflessly performed any task. As a result of service and operational activities of the battalion units for 11.5 months have the following results. Then come the figures. As the document shows, we detained and exposed 825 enemy agents, proxies and accomplices of the enemy, policemen, punishers, gendarmes, bandits of Aunopar, with whom Gehlen kept the closest connection, inspired and bet on them. A particularly serious blow was dealt to the gangs of Aun and UPE, in the creation of which Gehlen also invested a lot of effort. Without losing a single man, the battalion destroyed and captured 427 bandits. Lieutenant General Gehlen, who survived the war, adjusted the work of his spy office with new excitement. He wanted revenge for his defeat, but it was a futile endeavor. Border guards were vigilantly guarding the border in the center of Europe. The first elections to the Supreme Soviet of the USSR after the war were approaching. We were invited to the political department of the 47th Army. In the room where the chairmen of district election commissions were gathered sat a colonel whose face seemed familiar to me. Another colonel came in, said hello, and called the sitting one by his surname Tolchinsky. So this is the former senior political officer Tolchinsky, who before the war came to us to the 10th outpost and then withdrew together with us from the border. What an unexpected meeting. May I address you, Comrade Colonel? Please. Don't you recognize me? Tolchinsky looked at me carefully and then exclaimed, Pachev. We embraced. Tolchinsky told me that he was the deputy commander for political affairs of the division, which together with the battalion units guarded the zone and the border. That's why the service in the units and parts of the division were not border. In the room entered a member of the military council, the head of the political department of the 47th Army, Major General Kautov. The meeting began. After the meeting we said goodbye to Tolchinsky, and somehow it so happened that we did not manage to meet again. Only years later I received a very warm letter from him, in which he told about his frontline path. After the soldiers and commanders of the 94th Frontier Troops left the encirclement, Tolchinsky was appointed to the Motorized Rifle Division of the NKVD troops as deputy military commander of one of the regiments. He fought at Stalingrad, on the Kursk Bulge, forced the Dnieper, participated in the liberation of Kiev, Riga, Warsaw, reached Elba. After the war he worked in the Moscow military district. Now he lives in Bryansk. In the second half of November 1945, we learned that in the ancient German city of Nuremberg began to sit the International Military Tribunal, which considered the cases of major war criminals. On the dock sat Göring, Ribbentrop, Hess, Kaltenbrunner, and other leaders of fascist Germany, who together with Hitler plunged the world into the abyss of the bloodiest war in the history of mankind. The results of the trial and its materials are widely known. I remember about it only because one of the witnesses of the prosecution at this trial was a border guard of the 94th Detachment Stenkin, who was Major Wróblewski's liaison in the battle near Popelnaya. Accusing the leaders of fascist Germany in the committed atrocities, border guard Stenkin accused them on behalf of all border guards of the detachment. Several years passed. It was time to leave for the homeland. In this connection, the newspaper News Deutschland wrote another Soviet unit departed on Monday from the Neustadt Dresden railway station to their homeland. The population gave a hearty farewell to this famous 92nd Regiment, which was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for its heroism and exploits. On the morning of September 12, 1971, 3 people got off the car of the train Moscow-Kiev. They were former border guards of the 94th Border Guard, Detachment Lieutenant Colonel of the Reserve K. M. Kuzenkov, Senior Lieutenant. M. Kuzenkov, Senior Lieutenant of the Reserve V. Raevsky, and the author of this article. V. Raevsky, and the author of this book. We, 3 Muscovites, who found each other after the war, came to Kiev to meet with other fellow soldiers, to visit the places of the September battles of 1941, which were fought by the border guards of the 94th Detachment on the Ukrainian land. The meeting was timed to the 30th anniversary of the battle near Lubny, our last battle in the 94th Detachment. From the station we went to Vladimirskaya Street, the place of our meeting. Will we recognize each other in 30 years? After the war, several dozens of former fighters and commanders of the detachment were found. The initiator of the meeting was the former secretary of the party bureau of the 94th Detachment K. M. Kuzenkov. We slowly walked from the Hotel Kiev to the monument to Bogdan Khmelnytsky, waiting for our battle friends. And here they began to approach. The former head of the outpost, Reserve Lieutenant A. Donievsky appeared. Donievsky, who came from Odessa, a railroader of great stature, and in that distant time the commander of the department Pantelei Krivorotov came. The assistant chief of department of the headquarters of the detachment, hero of the Soviet Union, Major General of the Reserve Mikhail Nomov appeared. After him came a former border guard of Lieutenant Anikin's outpost, Arkady Uglitskik. Others also came up. We gathered 11 people. Only one of them, or rather, one of them was not a fighter of the unit, but she was our comrade and friend. After 20 years, the wife of political officer Sklya, Albertina Zhanovna, was found and gathered for this trip. In a special bus, which was provided to us by the headquarters of the Western Border District, we all went together to the places where once there were fierce battles. The bus window flashed familiar, and at the same time unfamiliar places, so everything had changed over the years. We recognized and did not recognize the roads, villages through which we walked 30 years ago, at which and for which we fought to the death with the Nazis, armed to the teeth, armored. Was it all the bursting of shells, the howling of mines, the clanking of tank tracks, the crackle of machine gun and machine gun bursts? Peaceful landscape outside the window. Ukrainian villages are drowning in green gardens. Tractors are puffing in the fields. Mature wheat ripples like the sea. A light breeze drives serene waves across it. Yes, it was. Everything happened. They wanted to wipe us off the face of the earth with fire, tried to crush us with the tracks of tanks, longed to crush us, to overturn us, to silence us forever, to recognize their strength, their superiority. But not they, and we are driving 30 years later through these places. They are gone. Not we, but they have been crushed, overturned, crushed. Having survived the most incredible trials, we defeated the fascist monster in a just struggle. I looked at these fields and villages, which remained in my memory like shards in the ground, and thought. I thought that no matter how hard the war was, no matter how great were the sufferings of the people, no matter how long was our way to victory, no matter how much pain about the dead and missing is still alive in my heart, but I remember the past with pride. Those who have travelled the many difficult front roads from the first day of the war to the last have something to be proud of. We believed in our victory from the first day. We believed when we had the last grenade in our hands and the last cartridge in our rifle. No, we did not only taste the bitterness of defeat, we also tasted the joy of victory. And the victories began not only when we drove Hitler's troops from Moscow, from Stalingrad, from Kursk, when we victoriously passed through almost all Europe. Victory was born with the first return shot on the border, with the first return grenade throw, with the first fascist who fell dead from our fire, with the first enemy tank hit. On these fields, in these villages, on these roads, on which we are passing now, the soldiers and commanders of our 94th Frontier Detachment did everything possible and impossible to stop the enemy, to delay him, to prevent him from making an easy march to Moscow, Stalingrad, Kursk. Neither tactically nor technically we were not ready for those battles. We were border guards. We could not by all conventional standards reflect the pressure of tank and motorized avalanches of the enemy. Our destiny was to fight with loners and small groups of secret and obvious enemy. But it was necessary, and we learned to fight with the regular army of the enemy who had never known defeat before. Overtaking heavy-duty Maz, our bus was rushing along the Belo-Tserkovsky highway. I looked at the calm bus driver, border guard Viktor Bragin, and remembered a very similar to him 19-year-old boy from Krasnaya Vyshera, Andrei Yermakov, who in June 1941 just as imperturbably drove the car to the place of our baptism of fire near Korostovo. And then we threw the fascists out of the state borderline. We saw the enemy's back in the first battle. We defeated the battalion, and we lost only one soldier machine gunner, Ivan Fursov. But Arkady Uglitskik, who was leaning against the bus window, was wounded. What is he thinking about now? He didn't have to go through these places with the detachment. He was sent to the hospital. But he too went through the whole war, and he had a lot to remember about it. Look, there's Grebenka, someone exclaimed. Yes, this is the same Grebenka, where we, coming out of the Ostenov forest, forced the swamp. This swamp was remembered for life by those who were here then. It was worse than German tanks. I read somewhere that a shell hitting a granite rock, if not a crack, then a chink in it, will certainly leave a trace. A shell of the largest caliber hitting a swamp will drown in it, but will leave no trace. It will hit, blow up a column of mud, and that's it. It's like he never existed. No trace, it's all gone, just as it was. It was a terrible swamp. But we overcame it too. In Potsdam, on the place of our battle with German tanks on July 14th, 1941, we met another border guard of our 94th Border Guard Unit I. Ivanov, who lost both his legs in the battle near Potsdam, and the former head of the outpost of the 95th Border Guard Unit, retired Major I.E. Kachaluba, who settled in these places after the war. We met with workers and school children in Potsdam, told them about what happened on this land many years ago. And children gave us flowers. But more precious than flowers was their love for those who fell by the death of heroes in 1941. The children took care of the monuments placed on the Potsdam land, collected everything that was connected with those battles in the room of military glory of our detachment created by them. From Potsdam we moved to Lisivietovka, where in the fight with the enemy it came to hand combat. It was drizzling rain, and it only approximated the situation in which we found ourselves then. After all, on that July day it was also drizzling rain. Only armoured German vehicles were crawling out of the thick wheat, where now there were fields with sugar beets. Now, on the swollen field roads, the collective farm vehicles were driving to the sugar factory in Kozhanka. When we found ourselves in Lisivietovka, the rain intensified, as if mourning those who had fallen in battle for this village. We got off the bus. On the square, where once enemy mines and shells were bursting, columns of dust and smoke were rising into the sky. Now there was a park, and among the trees there was a majestic granite obelisk with the names of the border guards of our detachment. We approached it, put flowers, stood in mournful silence. Willows lowered their branches to the ground. The water got behind my collar, flowed down my neck, down my body. But I had no strength to move, to shake off the torpor. I bowed my head. Albertina Zhanovna did not move. She did not think and did not guess, leaving the outpost, that this would be her meeting with her husband Maxim Sklya. In 1942 Albertina had a daughter, but she died before she was 2 years old. It's a long story. There is a lot of grief in it, but the courageous woman survived it, found the strength not to give up. This is what happened so many years after the beginning of the Great Patriotic War in Lisivietovka. On a granite slab the names of 6 chiefs of outposts and 2 political patrols. Among them is the name of Maxim Sklya, dear to Albertina and me. We will always remember you, Maxim. Further our way lay to the city, where the 94th Border Detachment made its last feat on the Ukrainian land, having detained here Hitler's division, then gave an opportunity to leave the encirclement to the units and formations of the 26th Army of the Southwestern Front. We arrived in Lubny at 1 o'clock in the morning and warmly bade farewell to Albertina Zhanovna. She was leaving for Kharkov, where she had lived for the last years. The night arrival in Lubny did not discourage us. After all, I and many comrades who travelled to the places of former battles for the first time were in this town, also at night. And this coincidence involuntarily revived the past, so distant now and still close. In the morning of September 16th, on the day of the 30th anniversary of our battle in Lubny, we were received by the first secretary of the Lubny District Party Committee. He spoke warmly with us, ordered to arrange the best possible arrangements, organised several meetings with the youth of the town. We visited School No. 3, where the director is a former frontline soldier, Reserve Captain A, SSS Sachenko. Red Pathfinders of this school did a great job of describing the combat path of the 94th Frontier Detachment, and on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution they came to Moscow, and I and several other veterans of the detachment had the opportunity to present Komsomol tickets to a group of students of this school. In School No. 7, where we were also invited, there is a pioneer frontier outpost. School children take care of the monument to the frontier guards of the detachment on Vasilenkovo Field, correspond with the outpost named after our comrade in arms hero of the Soviet Union, Captain Ivan Sereda, who died a brave death in July 1941 near the village of Golubyatin. And this school is still led by a former frontline soldier, Major of the Reserve I.L. We travelled to the villages of Krugliki and Olshanka, where we laid flowers on the graves of border guards fallen in battle in 1941, talked with students of these villages. Especially memorable was the meeting in the secondary boarding school, where orphans study and are brought up. It would seem that long ago the scars on the battleground scorched by fire have been smoothed over, the craters from bombs and shells have been ploughed, towns and villages have risen from ruins and ashes, but the children asked us a question. Please tell us about the war. They asked it not only because the war was imprinted in their children's imagination from the stories of their elders, from books and magazines that recreate one of the most dramatic and heroic pages in the history of their country, but also because in that distant past they are looking for an example to follow. After all, it was that heroic time that gave birth to true knights of war who preferred death to life on their knees. Here and we, former participants of the Great Patriotic War, border guards of the 94th Detachment, who fought on these borders, the children asked us to tell about the war. There were 800 boys and girls who gathered to meet us in the assembly hall of the school, but when we spoke, it seemed that the hall did not breathe, so attentively listened to the story about the past. It touched them to the depths of their souls. It was close to them, because the war passed through their native land, scorched their homeland, took with it many people close and dear to them. Once I came across the notes of 2 Soviet journalists who traveled through the United States of America by the route taken by Elf and E. Petrov on the eve of World War II. Petrov, much has changed since then in the life of the largest capitalist country, but much has remained the same. Traveling along American roads, our journalists were keenly aware of the characteristic features of the American way of life, American views, American thinking. At one of the gas stations, a young American got into their car. Recognizing that he was facing Soviet people, he said, "You know, we have a Russian war medal at home." It turned out that during the war his father was a sailor and went to Murmansk 3 times. Now the father is gone. My mother keeps the Soviet medal along with the American medals. Mom says his father used to call the Russians heroes. Told me you had heavy casualties. Is that true? It's true, the reporters replied. But you entered the war later than we did. Who told you that? I think that's what they used to say in school, the boy said. Embarrassed. But maybe I heard it on the radio. I don't remember where I heard it. Maybe I read it in the paper. What a thing. So Germany attacked you before Japan attacked us. I thought you joined us at the end of the war. What were your losses? Like us? More. No way. More than 300, but 000. More than 500,000? Stop playing games with me. Is it really over 1 million? The guy was shocked when journalists told him that the Soviet people lost 20 million people during the war. What a horror, he repeated. What a horror. During World War II, only one enemy bomb fell on America. It was launched by a Japanese balloon. In all the years of the last war, 4 enemy shells exploded on American soil. Their rainy night fell out sneakily to the west coast of the US, Japanese destroyers. American civilian casualties during the war amounted to 6 men. I also read about the impressions of a Soviet historian who found himself among West German schoolchildren. Here is what they answered him to the question, "What do you know about Hitler?" He did a lot of good things for Germany, and the German people should be grateful to him. It is clear to me, an old soldier who has travelled 1,000 versts on the war roads and has been on it all 1,418 days, that the fellow who met the Soviet journalists on the roads of America, the American students, as well as the West German schoolchildren, did not come up with their own answers. They are the result of propaganda, bourgeois fabrications and falsehoods with which the peoples of these and some other countries are abundantly supplied. When we said goodbye to the schoolchildren from the villages of Krugliki and Olshanka, we, the veterans of the Great Patriotic War, had peace of mind. Our Soviet children knew the truth about the past war. They knew who started this war, who was to blame for it. They knew why we defeated a strong, cunning, well-organized and prepared for war enemy. What was the role of the Soviet people and our army? On the example of border guards of the 94th Border Guard Unit, they saw how their grandfathers and fathers defended freedom and independence of the motherland, socialism. Saying goodbye to the guys, we felt that the combat baton of the older generation is in safe hands. We met with young but true patriots. I don't want them to experience everything that we have experienced. But if something happens, let them be like us. And so after another 10 years, in September 1981, I and my combat friends from the 94th Frontier Detachment visited these places again. On the eve of the 40th anniversary of the beginning of the defense of the city of Lubny, a memorial in honor of its defenders was opened here. We were invited to the festivities by the City Party Committee. The letter said Lubny City Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine will gladly receive a delegation of veterans of the Great Patriotic War who participated in the defense of our city from fascist invaders as part of the 94th Frontier Detachment. We are waiting for you. Secretary of the City Committee AAN, Sobolov. The meeting was opened by the chairman of the City Council of People's Deputies I. P. Goncharov, he said. Today, at this memorial, we honor the memory of those who in September 1941 made a heroic feat at the walls of our city. We will not forget their names and the sacrifices made by our people for the freedom and independence of the Soviet motherland. Eternal glory to the living and fallen heroes of the war. Secretary of the City Party Committee AA. Sobolov told the audience about the heroism and courage of border guards of the 94th Border Guard Unit, about how the workers of the city and villages multiply the labor traditions of the older generation. The national anthem of the Soviet Union sounds. A volley of military salute is heard. Froze solemnly honorary pioneer guard slowly slides down the cloth, and before the eyes of the gathered there is a mighty figure of a soldier bowing his head over the grave of the dead border guards. City leaders, representatives of enterprises, pioneers and school children, and we war veterans laid flowers to the place where our combat twin soldiers sleep eternally. One more monument to the border guards of our unit is erected on the Ukrainian land. Here comes to the end of my story about the past war, about my comrades, living and fallen. I set myself a modest task on separate combat and service episodes to show the contribution made by the border guards of the Carpathian group of detachments of the Ukrainian Border Guard District, first of all the soldiers and commanders of the 94th Border Guard Detachment, transformed into the 92nd Border Guard Regiment, to the great cause of the victory of our people over German fascism. The years of war were full of events. The situation often changed with such lightning speed that I could not remember everything. I told only about what was stored in my memory, what I remembered most of all, what I found confirmation of in the scanty records of archival documents. Fighters and commanders changed during the battles. That's why it was impossible to tell about all of them. I named only those with whom I happened to be near, who helped to restore the combat path of the detachment and regiment, who was better remembered due to these or those circumstances. Now I correspond with many of my fellow soldiers, with others I meet from time to time. There are also letters from strangers. People are looking for relatives and friends, battle friends and comrades, recalling the past. I answer these letters, help them as much as I can. I'm sorry to bother you. I am sure that you will understand my excitement and answer me. In your book there are lines about Regimental Commissar Bogotikov Ivan Nikiforovich. That's my father. He was Commissar of the 42nd Rifle Division, started the war in Brest, died in the defense of Stalingrad. No, there can be no mistake, you've met my father. I ask you very much to meet us, his sons. Vladimir Bogotikov. I'm a doctor by profession and I don't read many books about the war. I happen to read yours. The hours given to it became for me hours of deeply penetrating pride and gratitude to the people who defended the motherland in the harsh times. All of us, including me, died, at that time an unintelligent preschooler. The book had such a strong effect on me that I visibly felt myself among the border guards of the 94th Detachment, felt and experienced everything that they experienced, touched their shoulders, resented together with them, and rejoiced. How could the enemy conquer such people and such a country as ours? Vyacheslav Mikiv. I would like to say a little about the post-war fate of the commanders and fighters of the 94th Detachment. Retired Colonel F. I. Wróblewski, the Chief of Staff of the 94th Border Guard Detachment and the commander of the 92nd Regiment, finished his life in the hero city Brest. Twice the Belarusian people elected Fyodor Ivanovich to the Supreme Soviet of the Republic, and after retirement F. Wróblewski, remaining where the years of his troubled youth had passed on the border, met with young border guards, pioneers and schoolchildren, told them about the past, taught them to love their fatherland, their people, educated them to be ready for the feat. The former commandant of the station, Reserve Colonel A.L. Andrianov, the commandant of the station. L. Andrianov, whose commandant's office fought to the death with the Nazis at the Zhytomyr highway on the outskirts of Popelna, after the war worked in the main directorate of border troops, commanded a border detachment. Having retired, he did not stay at home. For many years he worked in the Leningrad Shipping Company. Now he often meets with young people, visits border outposts. In Kiev died the former head of the detachment, Major General retired Major General P. I. Bozy. In this city at one of the plants works as a senior engineer former Komsomol leader of the detachment, retired Lieutenant Colonel Pa Letishev. In Kiev live and work retired Colonel Z.O. Blumin, who commanded after F. I. Vrublevsky 92nd Border Regiment, Scouts Detachment Colonel retired M.G. Zverev, and Major retired A.I. Alexo, former Deputy Commandant retired Major retired N.P. Keblenko, Komsomol worker Major Reserve L. Iskakov. Former political officer of the outpost I. V. Sidorenko, who with a group of fighters to the last opportunity to defend the Lubnensky Bridge, is now a standard bearer in the village of Akbilak, Orenburg region. Senior Lieutenant of the Reserve V.V. Revsky is an engineer at a research institute in Moscow. In the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the USSR works former Assistant Chief of Department of the headquarters of our detachment, now Major General N.M. Bulanov. Fate through Reserve Captain I. Komarov to Makachkala. In Novorossiysk lives the former head of the outpost Major retired M.M. Trushevsky. Heads the laboratory of the Arkhangelsk Forestry Institute former Staff Sergeant V.A. Lebedev. In the village of Andriivka, Tula region, died former Chief of Staff of the battalion, Reserve Captain V.A. Anisimov, who died. Anisimov, who for many years the communists of the collective farm elected his secretary. In the Perm region settled former Border Guards Detachment A.F. Uglitsky P. Sobyanin G.P. Baishin A.I. Ermakov V. I. Sobyanin P.D. Ovchinnikov P.N. Nikulin. I. Rumyantsev P.N. Kravotai. M. Zavazin A.M. Dunevsky A.I. Dubinin A.K. Zlachenko I. Ivanov A. Konchits live in different parts of the country. Through the entire war past, and now faithfully work my combat comrades on the 10th Outpost V. Borisov PDD Dmitriev, A.M. Agafonov, P. Elisev, GGG Vyogov, V. I. Skolsky. In Simferopol passed away our military paramedic K.Y. Osipov, with whom I travelled the roads of war from the beginning to its victorious end. On the eve of the 40th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet people in the Great Patriotic War, became known about the fate of machine gunners 10th Outpost brothers Kretinin N.D. Kretinin, now retired, lives in his native village Chernava-Saratov region, and Ad Kretinin works as head of department of the Dagestan branch of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. The head of the personnel department of the construction department of the Poltava Regional Council of People's Deputies works as a reserve major N.A. Gerasimenko, in Volgorikhinsk works reserve sergeant I. N. Okolnichnikov, in the State Farm Proletarsky Omsk region works former commander of the department A. Minin. Former heads of outposts A. V. Zemlyanko from Lysychansk, Voroshilovgrad region V.Y. Fomichev from Krivoy Rog, former border guard I. D. Petrov from Kudymka. In the city of Lubny lives and works former border guard V. I. Yevtushenko, with whom I met 40 years later on the day of the opening of the memorial to the fallen border guards of the 94th Detachment. As I learned, V.I. Yevtushenko participated in the construction of this memorial. In September 1978, there was no one who in one of the most difficult days for the entire Southwestern Front, July 14th, 1941, led a combined detachment of border guards on the section Fastov-Popelnya-Kazatin, Major General retired Abazov. He passed a long combat path. He was the head of troops to protect the rear of the Second Baltic Front, held other responsible positions. He died in Lipetsk. Working on this book, I consulted with many of my fellow soldiers. Their letters and memoirs helped me a lot. I showed my manuscript to the former Commissar of the 94th Border Guard Unit, retired Colonel N. A. Avdyukin. Unfortunately, our combat friend, our commissar, did not live to see the book. but he read the manuscript and left the following note on one of the pages: "The combat path of the detachment in the Great Patriotic War is described truthfully. The command of the detachment, even in the first battle on the state border, was convinced that border guards have a high morale and are prepared to fulfill combat tasks in the most difficult situation. This was confirmed in subsequent battles with the enemy fascist troops and convincingly described. My desire to complete some moments from the combat life of the detachment due to a serious illness could not. I want to note that my fighting comrades in the detachment, survivors, proudly recall how heroically fought for our motherland his fighters and commanders. This book is dedicated to the bright memory of those who did everything to bring Victory Day closer.